Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to give you guys a bit of a rundown in what's going on in the Path of Exile economy, how trade compares with Path of Exile 1, and how that ties into the solo self-found experience, overall game, and the conclusion, as the title suggests. I do believe that there is primarily a crafting problem in POE2, and the solutions might be a little bit tricky. So there have been a lot of content creators talking about the fact that the POE2 economy is doomed. It's under crazy hyperinflation, and it is largely as a result of item rarity, the affix that you can get on your gear, the affix that you can get on your tablets that you apply to your maps, and the maps themselves that you can then multiply with the modifier effect of maps on your Atlas tree, comes together to have hundreds, if not over 1000% rarity, resulting primarily from breach monsters that come in copious amounts and ridiculous density, dropping multitudes of screens of loot, needing loot filters and all 6 portals in order to pick up. Now, there's a pretty good chance that you haven't yourself experienced this, and coming from Path of Exile 1, it's actually a pretty cool experience when a game kind of reaches that level of like efficiency and, all your investments in rarity gear are paying off and all that. But when it comes to Path of Exile 2, that has a few repercussions, and those generally have to do with any item that is even remotely good becoming, well, overly and prohibitively expensive for the majority of players. So, how did we get here? In Path of Exile 1, you could largely trade as you would in Path of Exile 2. There just wasn't an in-game function outside of the stash tabs that you had that you could open to the public going through their trade website. There was no currency exchange that it does a little bit more than just currencies. You can do a lot of anything that stacks up. Like you can do the rare soul cores. All of that stuff is really optimized and in-game in Path of Exile 2. I know a lot of you guys play solo self-found, so this is new to you, but yes, a big problem that kind of pushes the economy to where the game leads it. It does so a lot faster than it does in Path of Exile 1, even though the type of items that you trade are the same. The fact that it's so easy and so quick to trade specifically items that stack, it makes it so whatever happens a lot faster. It also happens a lot faster because, well, there's a lot more people playing Path of Exile 2, even though it is a closed beta state. It is, without doubt, a higher profile game. It's caught the eyes of many more than the people that initially didn't know or dismissed Path of Exile 1. And there is, the expedited trading that is playing, in my opinion, a really large role. In Path of Exile 1, we also had this thing where time would pass and things would become more expensive, and then there would effectively be an inflationary system as a new league would go on, and you would have a new league every 3 to 4 months, effectively resetting the economy back to zero, where people had to kind of go through the system all over again. Now, in Path of Exile 2, right now, they have mentioned that the version of the game that we have is not going to be the evergreen standard. It's going to be a special standard that is like the early access standard. So even though the economy is in a total disaster right now in Path of Exile 2, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you choose to play standard later on it will be, though I think it's pretty reasonable that it will be over time, because if you're not playing the new league fresh start type of content, well, you are missing out on these substantial economy resets where I think a lot of the balance really comes from. Now, people started discovering that rarity actually affected not just the items that dropped, but the currencies that dropped. And this led to a situation where people were getting like an insane amount of currencies, and it is a little bit out of balance where you are getting like far too many exalteds. Like even though I'm playing solo self-found and I play with like 60 rarity or something like that, maybe 80 rarity on my last build, I do actually have more exalted orbs than I need to just slam the gear that has potential to be good if I use an exalted orb on it. And that is kind of a new experience, but it's also kind of cool because I engage with the currencies. In my original Path of Exile 2 review, I talked about the fact that I feel that the itemization is quite good because I am engaging with the currencies. Well, I didn't really know at that point in the game that rarity multiplied the currency drops so substantially to where probably rarity needs to be toned down and have very severe diminishing returns. In Ruthless and Path of Exile 1, rarity did also play a really large role. I don't believe it worked on currencies, but if you had no rarity, you just weren't really finding any items, and if you had some rarity, you started finding quite a bit of items. Getting a rarity value on your character to like 20, 30, 40, 50 actually felt really good in Ruthless, and while some people do not like the idea of having Magic Find on their gear, call me old school, but from the Diablo 2 days, I thought it was kind of cool. I thought it was kind of cool that you'd see people with near best in slot gear, and they would sock it like a topaz, which is like 24% magic find, or something similar like a rune, in order to actually get some magic find as they're playing the game. I don't completely hate that idea, but I do see that it is way problematic that it actually multiplies or effectively upgrades the currency that drops in the game. That system absolutely needs to be revised. And the secondary system is that it seems to just scale too much. I think the idea of some rarity making a big impact and any more than that being heavily diminished is probably where we need to go. And largely this is a problem that Path of Exile 1 has already solved. So on one hand, it's like, oh, they're reinventing what doesn't need to be reinvented. Well, okay, they didn't want people to engage with like 6 million different currencies, understandably, so they kind of had to do it this time. And because, well, they're the same people that made Path of Exile 1, in this department, I do have pretty good faith that this will be resolved. The only real downside here is that if we end up playing the early access standard style for like many months to come, it will actually be very difficult for you to afford gear. And that is mostly on the high end. This is kind of where I want to tie into the topic of solo self-found. Solo self-found is a game mode where you basically just play by yourself. It is something that you can select when you make a new character, and you experience the game without engaging with other players, partying with them, or trading with them. And you might ask, why would you want to play this? Well, that answer comes because some people just find it fun, and it turns out it's not just some people, it's a lot of people. It is a game mode that they adapted after a lot of people were playing with a self-imposed solo self-found function in Path of Exile 1 many years ago. And I love it, and a lot of people love it. And it is actually a feature that after like 11 years or something, they actually added it to Diablo 3. Can you believe it? And people loved it in that game as well. There are some people that really want to play with their friends and trade and whatnot, but there's a lot of people that don't, and they want to kind of measure their achievements in the game with other people that also don't. And why would you ask? Well, it's a preference of play on one end, but on the other, when it comes to hyper-popular games that have a lot of aspects with exchanging items and currencies, there's a lot of bots, there's a lot of RMT, which is like real money transaction stuff, that really taints a lot of these accomplishments. Now, also there is going to be a power level difference. So if you're playing solo self-found, you're not going to have access to quite all the best gear. It's just what you find. If you play trade, you literally have access to the best gear. It might be prohibitively expensive, but that's where trade kind of devolves into a system that really is the main advantage to solo self-found for me. And that is because in trade, eventually, if you choose to play optimally, the best thing to play in trade is whatever earns you the most, basically, wealth in the game. And this is kind of cool because you can specialize in like one thing, like you can maybe tailor your maps or find a strategy where you use certain tablets or you like buy and sell certain items. You just get really good at like one thing that gives you the most wealth, and then you use that wealth to actually obtain the best gear through the market. Now, this sounds pretty cool, and I'm sure some people prefer this level of play, as there obviously are a lot of people that play trade. I don't like that version of play. I like the idea that in solo self-found, if I need something, I have to engage with that content directly. If I want a rare item that drops off of a boss, I need to actually adapt a new strategy with results in me facing that boss more frequently and actually find a way to kill it without losing the loot. So that is an approach where you're actually playing the game a lot more. And this actually had a really big turning point several years ago when I was playing with my wife Rania, actually. We were playing together in PoE, and I had found a Perandus Manor, which is a really rare map in the game. And it doesn't actually reward you with like that much stuff, but it counted for like a point of the progression on your atlas, so you can kind of make your atlas a little bit better. But the map itself, because it was so rare, the very top-end people that had the most wealth at the time, they could afford to spend a huge amount of currency just to get that one atlas point. So it was a case where I kind of wanted to do the map because I hadn't done that map at that point in the game. But on the other hand, that map was so insanely valuable that it was an absolute mistake to actually play it. It was a mistake to play a portion of the game that I actually found while playing the game. So that just felt so backwards, and that was many years ago. Since then, more and more people have adopted this idea of playing trade, playing the normal, not solo self-found version of the game, in a way that they obtain the most wealth at any point in time, and focusing on a strategy that min-maxes that. Trade aside, in solo self-found, I've been having a blast throughout that time, and now that we're playing in solo self-found in Path of Exile 2, it is pretty awesome to have to engage with all the different aspects of content. I am very happy with my decision that I have chosen to play Path of Exile 2 solo self-found. There are obviously a lot of issues. A lot of people pointed out that, well, it's difficult to, actually go through the maps in solo self-found. That's correct. I actually did my first T15 map with like 2 fire resist. Now that's when they had like much more negative fire resist. So right now it'd be, I think, like 22 or 27. I'm not exactly sure, something like that. But like that's kind of how you had to play. Path of Exile 2 is an interesting game because they kind of actually balance the progression in the game for solo self-found. If you play solo self-found, if you don't trade with any other players, your character very incrementally gets stronger. You get to maps with pretty much whatever gear. You might find like one rare item that's really good, or you might find one unique, and you actually kind of shape your character around that item if it's particularly good, so you have to adapt in that regard. You get the maps. The first few maps are not trivial, actually, if you're playing solo self-found. Why? Because your character is just bad. Your character is probably not even going to have capped resists. So the first few maps are actually meaningful. They have a meaningful level of difficulty, and I will tell you guys that it is actually pretty balanced. This actual constant level of difficulty being a little bit harder and a little bit harder, and trying to match that and catch up in a solo self-found environment is actually pretty gradual and pretty awesome. And it does actually scale up until the highest level of maps, to the point where I mentioned with the skill gems, for example, in the POE2 review video, as you climb like a couple more map tiers, you'll start finding like a gem, so you can upgrade your gem. Then you have to like, tailor your build a little bit because they have higher stat requirements. So it's constantly this, little bit of a step ladder, and it's actually pretty exquisitely balanced. But when you take that system into Trade League, this is gone. Now, a lot of people kind of didn't really understand the heart of what I was getting into in the previous Path of Exile 2 videos that I've made. But again, I re-rolled like a Titan. I wanted to play, at least eventually, with a big bonk hammer. yeah, I found like 5 Exalts in Act 1. So yeah, I could just buy a Ghost Wraith for 1 Exalted. Now, I didn't find a Ghost Wraith on my first main character in Solo Self-Found until level like 91. And when I found it, I basically made a whole new character because it was such a powerful item. But in trade, the people that are kind of constantly, churning out and doing an optimal farming strategy to get the most wealth, these strategies often result in them finding a huge amount of items like Ghost Wraith to where they are worthless. I think it's also a really big problem with skill gems because, okay, level 20 skill gems is still pretty rare, but like I have an abundant amount of level 19 skill gems. I have way too many level 18, 17, more than I could ever use. I can make like 15 characters with the gems that I have, and I don't even pick them up off the ground anymore. So I don't even know how. So it's kind of weird where, yes, the game is kind of balanced for SSF, but when you go into trade, it's just like you really skip these difficulty tiers. If you play in trade, you're going to get to where you go through the campaign. Yeah, you'll find the campaign a lot easier, understandably, but you'll get to like maps, and then you'll have like max resist. So you're going to do like the tier 1, tier 2 maps, and you're like, wow, this is a joke. So then you go from like a tier 1 map to like a tier 10 because you can just buy the tier 10 map. And then you do the tier 10. Okay, it's a little bit challenging. What can we do? We'll just buy some gems that are a higher level. Yes, they have high level requirements. I'm not talking about level 20 gems, but you can just buy the gem that is of your highest level character, and it's worth nothing because so many people are using optimized farming strategies in Trade League. Okay, so that was a whole lot of context. Now I want to get to kind of the heart of the video. POE2 has a crafting problem more than anything else. Why is that? When you are playing Solo Self-Found versus Trade, the main difference are the rarer items. Because you can't actually craft on top of them like you craft in Path of Exile 1, we actually have very dire consequences. In Path of Exile 1, you could have very rare crafting events, like a Veiled Orb could add from a small pool of modifiers, very powerful modifiers to an item, but you choose which item that property is at least rolled on. And there's many of these different cases to where in Path of Exile 1, the downside is that you need to know a lot about the game. You need to see an item not in what it is, but in what it could be if you used all the different crafting options and possibilities you may imagine. That's certainly a downside for people who are playing Path of Exile 1 for the first time, and it actually requires true mastery of the game to understand that aspect of it. However, that very aspect of it carries Path of Exile 1's balance between Solo Self-Found and Trade so heavily because you're not just finding items that are either good or not good. In Path of Exile 2, you pick an item up off the ground. Is it good? Great. Keep it or sell it. Is it bad? Vendor it. That's it. There's no real crafting on the item. The most you can really do is if you pick up a blue, but people are going to stop doing that if they haven't already completely, right? Pick up a blue, it has like 1 or 2 rare affixes. You can try to make it into a rare and slam it with a few Exalted Orbs. That's pretty much the extent of crafting. Honestly, that still feels pretty good in Solo Self-Found, but in Trade, I think that's over, right? We've been playing for a couple weeks. We don't do that here. Okay, we don't do that anymore. The issue is, and the way that I want to kind of have you guys understand is when you're playing Solo Self-Found, you're getting loot for all these different classes, okay? Let's say you get 100 pieces of loot, and let's say that 50 of them are good for one class or another, okay? However, out of those 50, none of them are often going to be good for your class, for what you're playing. If you're playing in Trade League, same thing. Those same 100 items are going to drop, maybe 200 because you have better gear through better rarity because it's trade. But let's just say 100 for the sake of argument. 50 of those items are going to be useful for somebody. And what you can do is take all of those 50 and sell them. So your rarity multiplier is like times 50. Like if you find one item out of those 50 in solo self-found, you're literally finding 50 times more items in Trade League. Now, this balance is not as severe in Path of Exile 1 because you're not engaging as much with the items as they drop, because you are utilizing heavily the rare crafting events to actually create the items that you need for your character. So it's not like the 50 items drop that are useful for somebody, a circumstance. A huge amount of the most powerful items can only be made with those rare crafting events. So it's more like you're actually finding the same amount of Veiled Orbs if you're playing solo self-found or in Trade League. And in solo self-found, you can use them on the items you want for your character. And in Trade League, well, you can do that too, or you can sell the Veiled Orb. But the value is about the same. And that's kind of the point that I want to make. Path of Exile 2 has a system where progression and atomization has worked wonderfully in the solo experience. But in the Trade League, it is filled with abundance. Even if they fix all the rarity stuff, even if they fix the breach stuff, the difference in gear is so vast because you have no serious crafting investment like events or options that it's always going to be resulting in a system of crazy imbalance. Like if they delete rarity from the game, if they delete breaches from the game, if they have a whole like reset, you're still going to have people that like 3 days into the game are going to have absurd gear in Trade League. Because above all of it, you literally have like a 50 times drop multiplier, or even 100 times drop. It's just an insane difference when you compare it that way. And the only way that they can reasonably fix that, it's not going to be to go to Path of Exile 1, because Path of Exile 1's advanced trading systems were implemented over, honestly, 11, 12 years of development. They didn't just, snap your fingers and there it is. You can't just put a system that complicated into a game from the start. It is absolutely overwhelming for new players. Hell, it's going to be overwhelming for veteran players if they do that for Path of Exile 2. The best solution here is probably going to be something of the sort of what they have in Last Epoch, which, to not go into too much depth, gives you additional rewards for playing by yourself. Like the solo player will have just a default 500% rarity or 300% or whatever. And you'll still have worse gear than Trade. That's definitely the case in Last Epoch. But you're just going to have significantly more gear. And the way that will actually work is they can then kind of utilize that standard to balance the game around that for solo self-found players, and Trade will have it a little bit easier, but not like 50 times easier. And that is, in my opinion, a big result of their current crafting system, which in a vacuum works pretty well if you're just playing like solo self-found, but when you get into the trading and economy sense of things, less well. Hope you guys enjoyed another POE talk, and we'll see you next time.